So today in history, I think last time we touched on the missionaries and what they did for the colonization. It's also a lesson I recorded and posted on my TikTok and also on my Facebook page, if I'm not mistaken. So, and YouTube channel too. So, as of today, we are going to start with the colonization of Zimbabwe by the British. I'm quite a fast teacher. I don't want to spend a week with the thing. So this lesson, I'll partition it into two. We'll deal with the first part, right? Then we'll deal with the second part tomorrow. Then it will be done, right? It's the digital era. Digital era we have to, right? So Zimbabwe was colonized by the British in 1890. So there are reasons for the colonization of Zimbabwe. I was teaching heritage. Same topic, but kungoti kana taku advanced level tinenge tane bit off. So ane depth zvinenge zvatisiyana. Right. So we'll categorize the reasons into economic reasons, social reasons, and also political reasons. So economic reasons include the belief that Zimbabwe was the second land led to the colonization of Zimbabwe. The colonizers, vachiuya muno muAfrica, tiri kutaura specifically takanangana nevakakoloniza Zimbabwe, vakatanga kusvika South Africa. Pavakasvika South Africa vakaona kuine gold nechii zvese. Then vawafila kuti since taona gold muSouth Africa muno, there might be higher chances with riri Zimbabwe too. So they believed that Zimbabwe was the what? Was the second land. That's what they believed. So first land yangarichi South Africa. So the British believed that Zimbabwe was built on a hill of gold, and gold was discovered in 1886 in the Transvaal area, and rumors of more gold north of the Limpopo stimulated European interest in Zimbabwe. Rhodes therefore directed his efforts to the fulfillment of that rumor. So tomorrow there is no heritage lesson, but there is a Shona lesson. Because I want to cover Shona grammar, I think we'll be doing Zimbabwe, yes, as part of Shona grammar. We did Sasta singular lesson. Tomorrow is Zimbabwe. Right, thank you. So Rhodes therefore redirected his efforts to the fulfillment of that rumor, and there was a big surrounding area across the Limpopo occupied by the Ndebele. So Rhodes aitofunga kuti gold riri kustretcha kubva muTransvaal South Africa richipinda muZimbabwe. That's why he was so much enthusiastic about the colonization on the Zimbabwean side. Right. So there were also some hunters, like Henry Hartley was an elephant hunter. There was also Kalmach, he was a geologist. These men reported the presence of gold between the Ngwato and Ndebele areas, as well as in Mashonaland. So hence the occupation was what? Was inevitable. Remember, I once explained it in the last lesson, that we cannot really say it was colonized by the British, but it was colonized by British and his company called British South African Company. So British South African Company yakatanga kuvhurira South Africa bayatanga ubroka. So kuti vasave company vakati azviri nani kuti colonize. That's what they did. So again, the other reason is the need for raw materials by the British led to the occupation of Zimbabwe. These raw materials included minerals, ivory, and timber. They were needed for British industrialization. They needed also to invest, and the British wanted to invest their surplus capital, which they had acquired through industrialization. They did not want to leave their money idle. They needed markets, because Britain was industrialization. So, when a producer in my industry is going, you need the markets to sell those products. So Zimbabwe became the what? The marketplace. So the Rhodes desired to seize Ndebele cattle again. He wanted those fat Ndebele cattle. led to the occupation of Zimbabwe. He envied the large herds of cattle and pastures in Zimbabwe, hence its colonization was a matter of time. So again, they also needed that fertile land. The British wanted the rich fertile lands north of the Limpopo for agricultural purposes. So socially, they believed that since isu tine dark skin nepfungwa dzenyu futi dziri dark, takatsva usiku hutatu tiri mabhambi last number. So the need to civilize Africans led to the occupation of Zimbabwe. Rhodes believed in British superiority and thought that it was the British responsibility to civilize the so-called Dark Continent. So Rhodes' belief in racial superiority of Britain led to the colonization of Zimbabwe. He was a racist in some form. He felt like the more the British acquired, the better for the entire world and human race. And Rhodes thus had a colonizing mission, both physically and psychological racial colonization. So they also wanted to spread Christianity. That's why they also worked in cahoots with what? With the missionaries. I think we touched on that in the last lesson. And the need to educate Africans also led to the occupation of Zimbabwe. And again, Zimbabwe's excellent climate, right? Yes. Zimbabwe you can experience various weather conditions in one country. I know that. In Zimbabwe, so they liked that. Right. So there were also political reasons. Rhodes' Cape to Cairo dream made the British to occupy Zimbabwe. Rhodes was an unknown imperialist and a dreamer. His ambitions were to set up a chain of British territories from Cape, South Africa to Cairo, linked by a railway line, and Zimbabwe lies along this belt and was not an exception. And Rhodes had a special mission in life to paint the map of Africa red. This meant acquiring many colonies in Africa for what? For Britain. So the Cape to Cairo dream, digitalisa Cape iripa ndo ndakadzidza panonzi pa University of Cape Town, like iripo ndo kumhenderekedzo kweAfrica tokutoti muchitobva palendi pacho makutopinda munonzi muAtlantic Ocean ndo kwekupesira ikoko. So paari kuti Cape to Cairo ari kuti Africa yese should be colonized, because Cape Town South Africa kwekupesira, then Cairo ndo kumusoro kuEgypt. So Zimbabwe was colonized for the prestige reasons. In Europe, a nation with many colonies was regarded as what is powerful. Nyika inopamba dzimwe nyika stereki yaibva yanzi chibaba. So zvaiva neshine, zvaiglowesa kana kuti zvaiamenozva zvaingoita kunyika imwe naimwe yaibva yatofila unga iri mpinga yototanga kutovhairira dzimwe nyika kuti ini tindazocolonize pakati tikuona. So it was colonized for prestige or for pride reasons. Yes. So the rise of Rhodes in South Africa, both as an economic and political force in the 1880s, made the occupation of Zimbabwe inevitable. And again, the Berlin Conference. Because pakamboitika the scramble and partition of Africa. Nyika dzemu Europe dzaicolonize dzemu Africa dzakatanga kurwisana. They fought over how to colonize and which countries to colonize and stuff, you know. So the Berlin Conference, there was a man called Otto von Bismarck, who was the Chancellor of Germany back then. Ndiye akabva ati no, tiri kunyanzisa, tiri kuenda kuAfrica tinorwira namakolonies, ngatigarei pasi tonyatsoronga toplana kuti tocolonize sei ndizvo. So the doctrine of effective occupation of Berlin suggests that a country would freely occupy its colony effectively, and not a country would fly over other spheres of influence. So Africa was divided into 20 spheres of influence. And the 20 spheres of influence, they should be effectively colonized. Those 20 spheres of influence, they should be effectively colonized. So it made that colonization unavoidable or inevitable or something like that. So this conference came up with the decision that any European power interested in any African areas should take steps to establish effective occupation. Kuti pasaitike noise, because idzo nyika idzi dzaakumakisa vachirwisana pachezvavo maAfricans achiona. So vakabva vagara pasi vakati no, chinoratidza kana wacolonizer, yes, unofana kubva waratidza kuti wacolonizer nei, making developments in that colony, yes, hoisting a flag in that colony. So zvinobva zvaratidza kuti wanyatsocolonizer, something like that. So that gave Rhodes the go ahead to occupy Zimbabwe. So it should be noted that prior to the Berlin Conference, there was little or no rush by European nationals to carve portions of land in Africa. So Berlin Conference yakabva itoti Africa yese icolonize, and yakatomaka Africa into 20 spheres of influence, which means hapana paisara. And again, Rhodes' desire to encircle the Transvaal. Tiri pa Berlin Conference, papa ni nyaya yema-treaties futi. Kuti tiratidze kuti imimwe Germany macolonize Namibia, munofana kuratidza magwaro zvatichabata later on in the lesson. You have to show some documents which proves that you have colonized. Zvazviri zvekuti paavoidike ma-conflicts. Because if you don't do that, pakasava nesaini yekuti wacolonize, fight inongoramba iripo. So there was also Rhodes' desire to encircle the Transvaal, which led to the colonization of Zimbabwe. The Boers or Transvaalers wanted to expand northwards, as this was their own outlet. So this was because the British had occupied Botswana and the Portuguese had occupied Portuguese East Africa. The British and the Boers were competing for control of the Ndebele. So this was shown by the signing of the Grobler Treaty by Boers in 1887. So Rhodes futhi anga achieva pa competition nema-Boers pa colonization of Zimbabwe. Ma-Boers had already occupied the Transvaal area in South Africa, and the prospects were very high that they could stretch into what? Into Zimbabwe and colonize Zimbabwe. So Rhodes had to encircle them. When I'm saying he had to encircle them, he was going to give them a boundary so that they could not stretch out or extend out of the Transvaal. Right. So again, that's the last point. Rhodes' desire to prevent other countries from occupying Zimbabwe led to the colonization of Zimbabwe. Rhodes aitoda kuti dzimwe nyika colonize Zimbabwe. Ndozvakabva aita kuti amhanye kuti abva colonize Zimbabwe yacho. So apart from the Boers, there were other Europeans who were also interested in occupying Zimbabwe. For instance, the Germans wanted to expand eastwards as they had occupied Namibia, and the Portuguese who wanted to join Portuguese East Africa and Portuguese West Africa. So this would frustrate the formation of Rhodes' Cape to Cairo dream belt of colonies. So hence the occupation of Zimbabwe was inevitable because papatogara paine sort of a competition again. As Boers, Portuguese and Germans posed threats to Rhodes' dream of creating a Cape to Cairo British belt. Right. So, TDPA, there were treaties signed by Lobengula and the whites which led to the occupation of Zimbabwe. Because Lobengula aionekwa sechibaba cheZimbabwe. Vachitonyora magwaro avo vaiti Lobengula was the king of the Matebele and the Mashonaland. So all the whites approached Lobengula for treaties. Yes. So we started with the Grobler Treaty. The first white people to approach Lobengula were the Boers, right? It is because they discovered gold in 1885. Kunonzi Witwatersrand, South Africa. I think it's Chitoriko, South Africa. So they felt like the gold belt would stretch into what? Into Zimbabwe. So the Boers signed the Grobler Treaty on 30 July 1887 with the Lobengula. The signatories of this treaty were Lobengula and Pierre Grobler on behalf of the Transvaal Republic. The Boers thought that Lobengula was the ruler of all territories north of the Limpopo. By this treaty, the Boers wanted to lay the foundation for further expansion northwards. There was also need by the Boers to prevent those interested in Zimbabwe, especially the British. So the Grobler Treaty, it was meant to the Grobler Treaty, it was meant to stop the British. So mama Boers aida because kuti isusu kuti waratidza kuti wacolonize according to the Berlin Conference. Panofanira paine ma-treaties or ma-documents anoratidza kuti have colonized. So we have here the Boers approaching Lobengula so that they can have those documents, So what were the terms of the Grobler Treaty? Number one, they agreed that there would be peace and amity between the Transvaal Republic and the Ndebele. And only Boer citizens with the passports would be allowed into the developed kingdom. That's what they agreed. Only Boer citizens with the passports would be allowed into the developed kingdom. And Lobengula promised to grant any assistance whenever called upon to do so by the Transvaal government. And the Boers also were to have a permanent representative, sort of a consul. There was someone who was going to stay in Ndebele state. Yes, achinzi ari kumirira maBoers. Zvichireva kuti pakaita maBoers anenge abamumbidze vanhu nechii, ndiye anga ari munhu aifanira kuita administer to that. His duty was to administer justice to Boers who might violate Lobengula's law. So Lobengula was to catch and extradite all criminals from the South African Boer Republic. So Piet Grobler remained in Matabeleland as an ambassador for Transvaal. The idea was to counteract the British interest. So that was a counter. Piet Grobler, that's why it's Grobler Treaty. Akabva atotanga kutogara Bulawayo macho. Achimirira kuti hapana here maBritish ari kutoda kutora Zimbabwe yacho. Natiri kuona mberi dzacho. But later on, Piet Grobler, he later on decided to go to Transvaal to collect his goods and stay permanently. So in his way, it is believed that he was killed in Ngwato territory after a supposed skirmish with the Kamas men. So up to now, the Boers argue that he was killed by the British. Yes, because they won the competition. So to Piet Grobler anga akuchiti ndikugara Matabeleland ndichiteya kuti hakuna maBritish ari kudai. But ndakasiya masina, ndakasiya zvinhu zvangu zviri kuSouth Africa. So regai ndinotora zvinhu ndiuye ndibva ndagara kuno permanently. Pakunozvitora ari kunzi akabva aurayiwa. So maBoers ari kuti maBritish ndiwo anofanira kunge akazviita. So when Sir Sidney Shepherd heard the news of the Grobler Treaty, he wrote to Lobengula telling him of Afrikaner invasion, and Lobengula became unsettled. It were these circumstances that forced Rhodes to send his emissary, J.S. Moffat, to negotiate a treaty with Lobengula. So Sir Sidney Shepherd of the British akabva anyorera tsamba kuna Lobengula akamuudza kuti shamani maBoers anoda kutora nyika yavo. So Lobengula was dealing with the two devils. Umwe Satan arikuudza umwe Satan arikuudza Lobengula kuti umwe Satan akashata. So the Boers believed that Lobengula had accepted Boer protection. They even published in newspapers in South Africa that the Ndebele had fallen under their sphere of influence. The idea was to prevent other concession seekers from entering into negotiations with the Ndebele. So Lobengula, when he heard the news by Sidney Shepherd that the Boers wanted to take over his land, he repudiated the Grobler Treaty. He denied having understood the treaty. Akatanga kutoramba kuti andina chandaimboziya pandakasaina penu zvavaitotaura vanavo. He even said Grobler only explained to him that the treaty was a renewal of an old friendship treaty signed between his father Mzilikazi and the Transvaalers way back. He attacked Grobler for having told one thing and written another on one page. So Lobengula akatanga kutoita turn around kuna Grobler. Tomutanga kutotaura kuti aiwa itsotsi munhu ada kutotivhara. So according to Stanley Samkange, to prove that this treaty was inaccurate, Lobengula asked the document to be read to Nungu, one of his indunas, in the presence of J.S. Moffat. Nungu answered, "Yes, I hear these words for the first time now. I never heard them before." So vakatanga kuramba yeseka one. Tanga kutotata totanga kuzvinzwa and under the influence of the British. So it means Lobengula repudiated the what? The Grobler Treaty, which means the influence of the Boers had been extinguished, thereby ushering in the coming in of the British. So my British people signed on the Grobler Treaty. But the Grobler Treaty hainonyatsosvika panhongonya vanobva vazosaina nonzi rat concession. Ndogwaro raizodiwa naRhodes kuti aenda naro kuna Queen kuti pane rat concession kuti apiwe nonzi Royal Charter. Royal Charter ndo mvumo or permission yekuti chinocolonize Zimbabwe from the British government. So regarding the Moffat Treaty chipedza lesson redu. So the Grobler Treaty caused the Rhodes to panic, and he quickly signed the Moffat Treaty. That was in February 1888. So that's the news of the Grobler Treaty made Rhodes to act immediately. To counter the Grobler Treaty, Rhodes sent J.S. Moffat to persuade Lobengula to cancel the Grobler Treaty and signed the Moffat Treaty in February 1888. So J.S. Moffat was of the London Missionary Society. Takati baba J.S. Moffat wainza. History of Anu Buganga no manachi. Ndara wa J.S. Moffat wainza Robert Moffat. Robert Moffat yanga rishamari ya mdara wa Lobengula. Urada utubate mlingi chitotsi chakaitika. So madara yakagutanga kuita ushamari before Robert Moffat na mzilikazi. So J.S. Moffat mwana wa Robert Moffat paari kuapproacha Lobengula ari kumaapproacha aine backup yekuti mana madhara edu akagutamba before. So kuna Lobengula it appeared like a treaty of friendship. Asi unotoziva kuti J.S. Moffat is a missionary rakatoteya kutoti nyika itorwe vanyatse kutendeutsa vanhu big time. So J.S. Moffat of the London Missionary Society was a man Lobengula trusted and respected, as they knew each other very well. So the treaty was meant to ward off the Boers. So the crafting of the treaty was deliberately made to include Mashonaland as Lobengula's territory. But Mashonaland was not Lobengula's territory. No patinozotaura nyaya yemamitsi zvimwe zvainyepa hatinyepi hedu kuti mandebele airaida, but the exercise influence yangeri around 80 kilometers radius. Time yatiri kutaura kusati pane mota kazvikuti vaitokwira madhomfeng nemarori voya voraida vakadzi nechibage kuno kwaMutare hazvimeke sense. They could raid but maareas ari padhuze and vanhu vanga varamba kubhadhira tribute. Okuti nyaya yetribute yanga iri nyaya yekuti it was a common phenomenon at that time. Hakuna mutemo, hakuna chinhu. Maingoziva kuti uyu ndochibaba munofanira kupa tribute. But the treaty was framed in such a way that Mashonaland was seen as Lobengula's territory, of which some parts of Mashonaland were not even his. Vakangozviita kuti bosi kuti tita colonize Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was into two parts then. There was Matabeleland and Mashonaland. So varungu vangasura colonize Matabeleland chete. They wanted to colonize Zimbabwe. Lobengula didn't exercise influence in some parts of Mashonaland. But pawaitaura vakatanga kutaura vachiti they what he was the king. Vaitichi hanzi the treaty even started by saying Lobengula the king of Amandebele and Amashona. So what were the terms of the treaty? They agreed that there would be everlasting peace and amity between the British Queen and the Ndebele people. The Ndebele were to desist from entering into any other treaty with any foreign state without the consent of the British. This implies that the treaty limited Lobengula's decision-making power in foreign policy. Yanga imbori treaty ye friendship wakudzwa usasapinde mune imwe arrangement neimwe nyika. Yes. And in everything that you want to do, you have to consult the British first. So the Ndebele did not understand the treaty in this way. When Lobengula heard from the Boers and others the implications of this treaty, he protested that he wouldn't have given himself to any person in the way the treaty is claiming. So the treaty was thus a clear case of taking advantage of the Ndebele inability to read. Yes. So Lobengula, according to the terms of the Moffat Treaty, was supposed to repudiate the Grobler Treaty, and Lobengula agreed to use all his powers to prevent any rupture of the treaty. Again, when that Moffat Treaty was signed, another missionary called Charles Yom was also available, and the missionary Mamanga Garachi to Garana Lobengula Mstetu. He is the one who fully explained the contents of the treaty to Lobengula. And Yom was again well known to Lobengula, hence diplomacy on the part of Rhodes. So by this treaty, the British wanted to prevent other countries from colonizing Zimbabwe. On the other hand, it was diplomatic resistance by Lobengula as he wanted to use the British in protection against the Boers or other whites who were in his country. So, yakauya iri futi a treaty of friendship, zvichiudzwa Lobengula kuti shamari, your country is bound to be snatched by the Boers. So, ita shamari nesu kuti nyika yako isatora, ivo vakatoteya kutotorawo.
Yes.
Lobengula
papa sina here vanhu vainonzi vaita sema-interpreters during the treaty.
Ma-interpreters anga aripo, but interpretation unongovharwa. Yes. Tichazobata rad concession uchanoona kuti vanhu vake vaitotemba, there were two trusted indunas called Loch and Skombo, vakatengerwa masutu nemabhodhoro yamarula vakatengesa nyika. Andikupaona. Plus Lobengula, some of the guys could speak Ndebele, vamwe varungu vacho iwo ana Heumi wao nana Moffat vanga vagara in Bantu territories for so long, so they could speak in Ndebele. Even iri yekuvhara Lobengula ingozvibvuma futi. So the treaty ensured that the Ndebele kingdom became a British sphere of influence. Since the treaty said Lobengula represented both Matabele and Mashonaland, it meant that the entire Zimbabwean land was now under the influence of the British. So the inclusion of both the Shona and the Ndebele was deliberate because they realized that they do not have the need to negotiate with the Shona diplomacy with the whites, because the Shona did not have an overlord. Mashona at that time, Papa sort of my chiefs. Chief Tangwena, Chief Mtasa. So kuti varungu vafambe chief by chief vachinegotiate zvasingaiti. Vakangoti kune chibaba chinonzi Lobengula ndo chibaba chemashona neMandebele. So it apparently turned out that there were no Ndebele witnesses to this treaty. Only C. Rome was also present as a what? As a witness. Reverend Young. Pa Moffat Treaty pa pasina vanhu website riva Lobengula futi. Papa nezo zwa missionaries. So Heum was working under Rhodes and was also paid. So the Moffat Treaty was supposed to be a treaty of friendship between Lobengula and the British, according to the eyes of Lobengula. But in fact, it became the first step in the collapse and subjugation of the Ndebele and Shona people by the British. So Rhodes akabva feel out, Moffat Treaty has set a foundation. Ndikunyatsaona chinoti jwo. That's why he came about with the Rat Concession of October 1888, which we are going to start with tomorrow. Then we finish colonization of Zimbabwe.